very good to be back with you again here and experience just the wonderful energy in this community. It is just great. So let's begin with this parable in Matthew 13:47. Actually, it's more of a metaphor than it is a parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore and sat down and put the good into baskets and threw back the undesirable. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, you don't usually hear that kind of a scripture from the Unity pulpit, do you? But thank goodness we have metaphysical interpretation. Aren't we grateful? We've traditionally understood in Unity that fish stands metaphysically for ideas. There seems to be an endless number of fish in the sea, and there are indeed a numberless, infinite number of ideas and thoughts that can come to us. My interpretation of that story would be that thoughts, experiences, and ideas of every kind are gathered into the net of our consciousness. In fact, I think it's more like we are seining all the time. How many know what seining is? Yeah, okay, well, so some of you drop a big net with weights on the bottom and floats on one side, so the weights go down, and it's like making a big fence so that, you can keep what you caught. You can look at the fish you caught and keep the ones that you need to keep and discard the ones that you don't. And we begin seining in consciousness at least from the moment we are born. We are perceiving at a very, very early age, making meaning from the perceptions of the events that we encounter. And on this journey, then, we look at those fish, those ideas. Some of them we can discard, and some of them that we want to keep, we can. So did some of you get some new ideas from this book, Eye of the Storm? Yeah, some of you did. I had three comments this morning. One person said, I just love the book, and the other person said, I'm just so glad to be done with it. Here's the bad news. If we're on a spiritual journey, we never are. Never are done with it. Did you also see that you have some ideas that you want to remove from your consciousness and that you practiced doing that? And can you see how often we sometimes make something happens to us and we make it mean something that may or may not be accurate? Some of the ideas that we really ought to let go of may tend to get stuck in the net of our consciousness. And sometimes we have to spend some time and energy, and I don't know about you, I've had to spend some therapy dollars in getting them out. Removing anything, when we remove anything that has been a part of us for a very long time. Our beliefs, our consciousness about others and ourselves, our prejudices, our judgments, it can be a painful experience. We can be resistant to letting it go. It can cause weeping and gnashing of teeth and suffering in biblical terms. Now, lots of those things we make up from is a very limited perspective of a very young child without any experience. And yet as adults, we're often unwilling to see that perhaps there could be a different and more helpful view of what it is we think we remember. One of the hardest lessons from this book study, in my opinion, and at least I think to fully live into, is that the I, the capital I am, the center of, I am the I of the storm. The storm inside of me is not about anybody else. It is not about what they may have done to me. It is about my own expectations and disappointments. It is about my attachment to having things be my way, having the plans I want work out the way I want them to in my time, in my way. Nothing and no one is against me. Let's say that together, shall we? Nothing and no one is against me. It's not always easy to claim that, is it? It doesn't always feel that way. And whatever happens to me also happens for me. Let's say that together. Whatever happens to me also happens for me if I'm willing to let it be that way. These are two principles which, if we apply them all the time in our own life, it can absolutely, truly change it. It is particularly challenging sometimes for me to see what somebody else has done is for me when I've not been willing to face myself and my part in creating the situation. Now, it is true that sometimes people do things that are hurtful and that are right down mean, things that nobody deserves to have done to them. It happens sometimes. And we may or may not have contributed to their actions. But if we have a reaction that is an internal storm and is anything less than also compassionate for ourselves and them, then it's something we need to pay attention to if we're going to continue to grow and mature spiritually. So here's my barometer. If it gets me in the gut, it is my issue. If there is a storm inside of me, it is my business. Now, it may also be theirs, but their business is none of my business. My business is my business, and very likely it results from some of the debris that's been caught in the net of my consciousness. There's some ideas or beliefs that this should have happened some other way. So if I'm angry and upset and feeling hurt and betrayed, then it is for me to know that there is a valuable lesson for me in this event. Now, I don't know what would work for you, but I'm quite sure that you can figure it out. And that is my main clue, is that if it gets me in the gut, it's my issue. And I can't even begin to deal with the splinter in my companion's eye until I've dealt with the log that is in my own. And I don't know about you, but one of my great clues, and actually my main MO, my modus operandi, my go-to mindset is blame. It's one of those very big fish that seems to have gotten very stuck in the net. Either that or there are just so many of that species, or they keep coming, that I have to get rid of them all the time. I have to notice it all the time. What if in every situation we could take blame out of the equation? So I have to ask, so what are the consequences to me from my blaming? So what are the consequences to you when you're in blame? What are the consequences for you? Who can say?
Negative.
Pardon?
Negative.
It's a negative consequence. So why is it a negative consequence for us?
You're going to have to deal with the situation again.
You're going to have to deal with the situation again. And until we're willing to deal with it again, what do we get to be? A victim. We get to be the victim. So how does being a victim serve me? I don't have to look at myself. My focus remains external. When we blame, we keep ourselves from taking responsibility. And when we do that, our focus is kept external. We abandon ourselves. Nobody's home. And why do we abandon ourselves? For me, it's because it was just so painful to see that I had done that to myself. So I want to displace it, which means that I can only place it on somebody else. Two of the biggest mistakes I've ever made in my life, one in one of my churches and one in my personal life, were the hardest for me to recover from and come to terms from, because it was really too painful for me to look how I had abandoned myself. In both cases, my need to please, my need to maintain a certain image that kept me from telling myself the truth. And I had an intuitive knowing that I totally ignored. I abandoned myself in order to please someone else, or try to please someone else. And when we abandon ourselves, We make decisions that are not even in our own best interest. Sometimes they are expensive and time-consuming. And here's an illustration of how that can look. Something happens, often as a result of my abandoning myself, and I want to displace the blame. I don't want to live in the eye of the storm. So I create another storm. So this is actually a picture. I think the name of the storm was Katrina. This is a real storm. Here's the eye of this storm, and it was spawning another storm. See that little eye right there? It was spawning that storm. I create another storm around the other person. And usually, and unless that person is very unusual, they begin to react to my reaction. Hello. And then we have a perfect storm of sometimes violent interaction. It may be only in language or feelings, but it can create a very violent interaction. And the hurt gets deeper, and the difference is more prominent, and the position's more entrenched, because by abandoning myself, I created a problem I did not know how to handle. In both of those cases, I abandoned myself. But here's the deal, you see, adults can only be abandoned by themselves. Every time I felt abandoned as an adult, I can trace it back to abandoning myself, usually an intuitive knowing. And when I start blaming my actions on others, I'm abandoning myself once again. Nobody's home. When our focus remains external, we're not available to ourselves. We avoid the very things that we need to deal with, including compassion for ourselves. And what monumental mistakes we can make. Think about it. In my career, in my workplace, and in my primary personal relationship, those are huge. They're huge for us. All because it's too painful to look at what I'm doing to myself. Unwilling to look into the net of my own consciousness and see what was there that I needed to bring to the surface and let go. Now, I knew when I was going through both of those things that adults can only be abandoned by themselves. And one would think that I could say, okay, I see that I'm feeling abandoned here, so therefore, something about the line in along the line in these transactions, I have abandoned myself. Well, it didn't quite work that way, not for a very long time. I had not realized that when I did it and in what critical ways. And it took me so long to see what I had done so that I could see with clarity what needed to be done now. And we get taught blaming from a very, very early age. I heard a child not too long ago say, well, you know, I can't wear that kind of thing because I'm fat. And the first thing I said was, who told you that? Now, my good motive was hopefully mitigate the belief that this 8-year-old child, who wasn't even the least bit pudgy that I could see, thinking that she's fat. But all I did was tell her to continue to think externally, which she was already doing, right? That she should blame someone else for what she was thinking and feeling. Now, I grant you, at 8, that first thought probably came from outside of her. Of course, it is all around us. But she had already internalized it to some degree because she affirmed it. It just was no longer external. I finally realized that I could ask her a few questions that I hoped might have helped her realize and understand at least a little bit that maybe there was another way to look at herself. I hope that happened. I don't know. My blaming is so automatic, it's like a free radical looking around for something to stick to. You know? What if in every situation we could take blame out of the equation? What if we could observe ourselves in every transaction so that we stay focused on our own process internally, notice the automatic response arising within us, and rather than speaking out of that habit, take a breath and make a choice for an authentic and compassionate response, both for ourselves and the other person. So how many of you have plans to be with family over the holidays, Thanksgiving? Mm-hmm. Well, there's a subject, isn't it? The Thanksgiving table. spending time with people who know best how to punch our buttons. After all, they installed most of them. Now, the last time I was here, I talked about spiritual and emotional maturity and quoted our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, who said, "Enlightenment is of little or no value unless we continue to mature spiritually and emotionally." And the family Thanksgiving table is a darn good laboratory for measuring and practicing emotional maturity, isn't it? This is a quote I saw very recently. I'm sorry that I can't attribute it. I don't remember where it came from, but here it is. "Let family be new. Reunited with 5 of my 6 siblings and my own children, I could see how easy it is for me to slip into the same old patterns. And I did, probably more than I even knew. But being together offered me an invitation, supported by my own time away, to see what was new and possible. I didn't have to fall prey to my usual knee-jerk reactions, nor categorize people as though I understood them before they even spoke. Stepping outside of your habitual thoughts and behaviors with family offers very good practice for doing the same thing with your work family, and with whom you may also have grown a bit judgmental and closed-minded. I invite you into that space this season to let family be new. Let co-workers be new. How would it be to go through the net of your consciousness and look at our beliefs and our judgments about our family and others, to be willing to see that people can change. I've changed, therefore people can change. So I know that other people can change too, and they may have. How would it be to see that when I feel and act differently than I have with others, they might be different with me? It is in the best interest of the planet and the family and our own spiritual growth to create as open a space as possible so that they can demonstrate who they really are, not who I've always thought they are. So it is possible that they are capable of being different than I have always perceived them. That's one step. And then, of course, we have to let go of our expectations of them. We have to recognize that people will do whatever they do. However my attitude may have changed, Uncle Dan may still already be drunk at 11:30 in the morning. And how will it serve him and me and the family and the day to be in judgment about that? Can I observe my old judgments and resentments and anger and perhaps even fears of the chaos that he can sometimes create? Notice that they're there and simply make a choice to respond in love, remembering what our friend Cindy Wigglesworth says, that love is like a bird with 2 wings. One is compassion, the other is wisdom. If one of them is broken, the bird cannot fly. Love is not pretending everything is fine, everything is allowed here, everybody is okay. That's just another fishy idea that needs to be discarded from the net of consciousness. That is not love. That is most likely ego unwilling to take an appropriate stand for fear of being not loved or rejected or whatever. Compassion sees the hurt and the pain that Uncle Dan is covering up. Compassion knows that most of us wake up many mornings afraid and confused and feeling not good enough and inadequate and uncertain and in doubt. Here is what the family systems people know. When one member of the family can calmly state his or her own convictions and beliefs, and then simply, quietly, as Ashley sang this morning, take action on her convictions without criticism of the beliefs of others, and without becoming involved in emotional debate, then other family members will start the same process of becoming more sure of self and more accepting of others. And we have to add to that, in their own time and in their own way. With our centered process, we can create a space that others can step into if they choose to begin their own healing. When we're blaming, nothing changes, and the unpleasantness can absolutely escalate. The opposite is to simply be present to our inner self, to be a self, and define a self in the presence of others. And to say, well, this is what I believe, and this is what I stand for. To do that without being forceful or self-righteous or putting anybody else down, we can at least have peace with ourselves, true peace, and we can truly listen more carefully without filtering everything through our net that is clogged up with the old fishy tails. We become more tolerant, less likely to resort to extreme words and actions. Our thinking becomes more reflective and less polarizing. We can be surprised that there is some truth, even a little bit of agreement in what crazy Cousin Margaret always talks about. And we can make that connection and begin to reestablish a new place for a relationship with crazy Cousin Margaret. Spiritual maturity shows up in the way that we chop wood and carry water, not in our experiences of bliss. A metaphor for the way that we speak, the tone of voice, the kindness in our face, the softness of our hearts, even when we have to speak the hard truths. Chopping wood, carrying water, the everyday change, the normal things we do. It is about self-discipline and integrity, knowing ourselves, a growing ability to be present whatever is going on around us. To stop blaming the trash pickup for interrupting our meditation time. Just say, I notice I'm paying more attention to my irritation over the fact that the garbage truck is late this morning than I am about the peace that passes all understanding deep within me. I notice I'm paying more attention to what Uncle Dan ought to do, or what I think Uncle Dan ought to do, than I am about my having some compassion for him and listening to him. You can determine to be more present and practice that. You will have fresh new ideas. They will come to you in the moment. Fresh fish for your spiritual meal. And you will know exactly what to do, how to do it, what to say, and how to say it. It may hurt your ego a little bit to be willing to let go of being right, of being the one who knows, and who's so spiritual, and who being the rebel self. Some of us are the rebel self, but I promise. Being willing to believe in the truth that I am the eye of the storm will yield the peace that passes all understanding. A deep and true sense of gratitude, which in turn will create for all of you a happy Thanksgiving.